She almost didn't go, and that's the part nobody warns you about class reunions. Not the invitation, not the RSVP, but the 3 days before, when you're standing in front of your closet staring at a dress you bought specifically for the occasion, and something low in your chest keeps whispering, "Stay home." Han Seo-yeon had heard that whisper. She had listened to it, argued with it, and finally decided that 12 years was long enough for people to grow up. Long enough for old wounds to close. Long enough for cruel girls to become decent women. She was wrong, and she had no idea that across the city, a man she barely remembered was already on his way to prove exactly how wrong she was. Picture it, a hotel ballroom in Gangnam, glass walls facing the Han River, the skyline lit up gold and silver beyond the windows. The kind of venue that makes ordinary people feel briefly important. A string quartet playing low under the chatter. Champagne catching the light like little promises nobody intended to keep. Former classmates in tailored hanbok-inspired gowns and dark suits, hugging too tightly and laughing too loudly, performing a joy that the open bar was helping sell. Seo-yeon stood near the drinks table alone, in a fitted charcoal dress that ended just below the knee, the kind of elegant that only someone who understood her own proportions could manage. Her hair was pulled into a low, sleek knot. Her skin caught the cool light of the chandeliers. From the outside, she looked like a woman who belonged wherever she chose to stand. From the inside, she was counting the minutes until she could leave. She scrolled her phone, pretending to read something urgent, the universal costume people wear at parties to look busy instead of alone. She had already sent a voice message to her best friend Jae-hi. "I made a mistake coming here. Call me in 45 minutes with an emergency." Jae-hi had replied instantly, "Give it an hour first. You deserve to be seen." But in a room full of people who'd known her during her most breakable years, being seen felt less like a gift and more like a threat. Why had she even come? That's worth sitting with. A woman who had survived being quietly frozen out, the only student from a modest neighborhood in a circle of old Seoul money. Why walk back into that room voluntarily? Pride, some would say. Point to prove, others might guess. The real answer was smaller and sadder. Some stubborn part of her still hoped people could change. That maybe Yoon Ha-yoon had grown up. That the cruelty she remembered had been exaggerated by time and insecurity. That hope was about to be corrected. Across the ballroom, near the floor-to-ceiling windows, stood Yoon Ha-yoon. If you were casting a drama about inherited privilege, you'd cast someone who looked exactly like her, sleek, polished, radiating the specific confidence that comes not from character, but from never once being made to feel unwelcome anywhere. She'd married well. Her husband, Do-yeon, a cardiologist, was currently nodding along to a conversation he clearly wasn't following. Ha-yoon had the glow of a woman who decided early in life that being important and being good were the same thing. She noticed Seo-yeon the second she walked in. Of course she did. "Oh my God," Ha-yoon murmured to her two closest satellites, Min-jae and Yi-rin, women who had spent university laughing at whatever she laughed at and frowning at whatever she frowned at. Seo-yeon actually came. "Alone by the looks of it," Min-jae said. Ha-yoon's smile lived strictly on her lips, a decorative feature, not an emotional one. "Give me a few minutes." Yi-rin, always the sharpest of the three and therefore the most dangerous, tilted her glass. "Be nice." "I'm always nice." She wasn't. Back at the drinks table, Seo-yeon felt it before she heard it, that shift in the air when someone approaches with intention. She looked up and there they were, moving toward her in the unhurried, synchronized way of women who have never had to rush for anything. "Seo-yeon," Ha-yoon opened her arms like they were old friends reuniting after years of real warmth. The hug was brief and performative. "I am demonstrating affection, not feeling it. I cannot believe you're here. You look wow." "Good to see you, Ha-yoon." Her voice came out steady, a small victory. "It's been forever," Min-jae said, air-kissing her cheek. "You haven't changed at all." "Thank you." Seo-yeon wasn't sure that was a compliment. She accepted it anyway. Small talk settled into its usual uncomfortable choreography, and Seo-yeon noticed, with the quiet vigilance of someone who has learned to read a room for a living, that the questions began almost immediately. Softly, conversationally, the way a blade enters before you feel the cut. "So what are you doing now?" Ha-yoon asked. I run my own architecture firm, residential and boutique commercial work. That's lovely, warm and hollow, like expensive wrapping paper around an empty box. Still in Seoul. 5 years now. Wonderful, a pause. And are you married? There it was. The question always lands with a smile attached, which somehow makes it worse, because the smile grants plausible deniability. If you flinch, you're the one who made it awkward. Not yet, Seo-yeon said simply, reaching for her glass. Children. No. So you're just focusing on the career thing, Min-jae said, tilting her head in performed sympathy. I enjoy my work. Of course, Yirin swirled her drink. It's just, at our age, most people have figured out the personal side, you know. Seo-yeon said nothing. She knew exactly what was happening. This particular brand of cruelty never announced itself. It worked through implication, through the careful arrangement of innocent-sounding words into something that cut and left no mark. They'd sharpened this skill over a decade, the way some people take pride in a craft. Why had they hated her so much? The question had lived quietly in the back of her mind for 12 years, a song she couldn't fully remember but couldn't forget either. What had she done except exist in spaces they didn't expect her, except earn a scholarship to a school they'd bought their way into, except refuse to shrink herself into something easier to ignore? Maybe that had always been enough. Honestly, Ha-yoon said, glancing around the room, I always thought you intimidated men a little. You had this energy like you didn't need anyone. So focused, Min-jae agreed. Always studying, always working. I remember thinking, when does this girl breathe? Men want to feel needed, Yirin added, delivering it like generous wisdom. You always seemed so self-sufficient, not a criticism. The words were wrapped in concern, delivered with sisterly tenderness. If you caught only fragments passing by, you'd think these were women giving honest, caring feedback. You'd have no idea every sentence was a small, precise humiliation, delivered by women who had never once been held accountable for the damage they left behind. Seo-yeon felt heat rise behind her eyes and blinked it back. Maybe, she said lightly, and her voice was remarkable in that moment, unbothered on the outside, while inside she was 20 again, the girl who'd arrived at university on a full scholarship, bright-eyed, and spent 4 years being quietly, invisibly diminished by these same women now standing in front of her in designer heels. If this story is already living rent-free in your head, drop a comment telling me who you'd have walked away from first. I read every single one. And then it got worse, because the universe had apparently chosen a Thursday evening in Seoul to deliver every possible humiliation at once. She felt the shift before she processed the cause, a different kind of attention rippling through the crowd, heads turning toward the entrance. Then she heard his voice, a touch too loud, performing warmth the way he always had. Seo-yeon. Kim Tae-hyun walked in wearing a navy suit and the easy confidence of a man who had never once doubted his welcome anywhere. Handsome in an unremarkable way, the kind that photographs well but doesn't linger in memory. On his arm was a woman, tall, fair-skinned, with a smile that had clearly never met a flaw it couldn't conquer. Seo-yeon's stomach turned over once, quietly, like a page in a book she'd already read and didn't want to revisit. His eyes found her immediately. People's eyes always find the one they're trying not to look for. Seo-yeon, he said her name like a surprise he wasn't sure how to categorize. Wow, hey. Hey, Tae-hyun. She smiled, astonished at her own composure. This is Soo-min, my fiancé. Soo-min extended a gracious hand, the confidence of someone who has never felt threatened by anyone in her life. Congratulations, Seo-yeon said, shaking it. Soo-min's eyes did a quick, almost imperceptible sweep, the assessment women perform in under 2 seconds and never acknowledge, then smiled warmly. Oh, you two know each other from school. That's sweet. Did you date? Direct, probably innocent. The cruelest questions usually are. Briefly, Tae-hyun said, with the specific casualness of a man minimizing something that had been neither brief nor casual. Small world, Soo-min said, and turned her attention back to him as naturally as a flower turning towards sunlight. And just like that, Seo-yeon ceased to exist in that particular orbit. She stood there 4 more seconds, then set her glass down, smiled at no one in particular, and walked to the restroom with the slow, deliberate dignity of a woman determined not to let them see a single thing. She made it inside before the first tear fell. The restroom was mercifully empty. She gripped the cool marble edge of the sink and looked at herself in the mirror. Her makeup was still perfect. Isn't that the cruelest detail, that you can look completely fine on the outside while something old and ragged tears quietly inside you? The flashbacks arrived in fragments, unbidden. The dormitory hallway where she'd overheard Hyun describing her to someone as asterisk, that scholarship girl who tries too hard. The group project where she'd been quietly handed the most work and the least credit. The weekend gathering she was never once invited to in 4 years, while her roommate, ordinary in every measurable way, got invited regularly. The way Hyun had stopped walking her to class because, as he'd explained gently and terribly, it was complicating things with his friend group. She had survived all of it, built a firm from nothing, learned to read blueprints before she'd fully learned to read the unspoken rules of rooms like the one she'd just walked out of. She had clients now who flew her in for consultations, a small wait list of people who wanted their homes designed by the woman whose name kept coming up in the right circles. She had a life she was genuinely proud of, except when standing in this exact constellation of old wounds, where none of that seemed to count for anything at all. But survival, she thought, gripping the marble tighter, isn't the same thing as healing. You can build an entire life on top of an old wound and still feel it ache every time the weather changes, every time you walk back into the room where it first opened. She dabbed beneath each eye, took one long breath. She was leaving, walking out with her head up, collecting her coat, going home, and never attending another reunion as long as she lived. She pushed the door open. If you've ever walked back into a room you swore you'd never revisit, hit subscribe, because you already know what's about to happen next, and you don't want to miss how this one unfolds. The energy in the ballroom had changed completely. Seo-yeon felt it the moment she stepped out, that shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm, when the air goes still and something enormous is about to happen. Conversations had dropped in volume. Heads turned toward the entrance. A hotel staffer near the doors was speaking rapidly into an earpiece, his posture rigid with the anxiety of someone unprepared for whatever was arriving. "Who is that?" someone murmured near her. "I heard he's the heir to that shipping and construction conglomerate," a man in a gray suit replied, craning his neck. "Something about his family just acquired this whole hotel chain." Whatever else he owned was lost beneath a ripple of whispers moving through the crowd like current gathering speed, passing through clusters of classmates who, moments ago, had been discussing tuition costs for their children and whose apartment had appreciated more. Now every one of them faced the entrance. Someone near the bar was already recording on their phone, the way people do now before they even understand what they're recording. A woman in pearls turned to her husband and whispered something that made his eyebrows lift. Even the quartet, which had been coasting through a mid-tempo arrangement all evening, seemed to notice the shift and let the current piece run a beat longer than it needed to, as if waiting to see what would happen before starting the next. Seo-yeon should have left. She knows that now. She should have collected her coat and gone home in the quiet dark of a Thursday night. Instead, she stood at the edge of the room, one hand resting on the back of an empty chair, and watched. The doors opened, and Kang Do-hyun walked in. There's a particular quality certain people carry, a gravitational presence that has nothing to do with height or beauty alone, though he had both. The way a room reorganizes itself around a person without being asked. Do-hyun had this in a way that was almost unsettling because it was entirely effortless. He wasn't performing anything. He was simply walking, and the room was simply responding, and he seemed indifferent to both. His black suit was clearly not from anywhere with a storefront, the kind of tailoring that whispers rather than announces. His expression was composed, not cold exactly, but sealed, like a room with no windows. 2 security men followed at a measured distance. He looked like someone who had never once stood at a drinks table pretending to read his phone. Ha-yoon spotted him across the room, and Seo-yeon watched. Even from a distance, the transformation happen, the slight lift of the chin, the almost touch of her hair, stopped halfway because touching your hair is too obvious, and Ha-yoon was never obvious. The hotel manager materialized from somewhere near the kitchen doors, hand extended, smiling the institutional smile of hospitality professionals worldwide. The smile that says everything is under control even when nothing is. Do Hyun shook it briefly, said something the manager received with enthusiastic nodding, gesturing toward the private lounge upstairs as though eager to usher him away from the crowd entirely. And then, in the moment the room would talk about for the rest of the year, he stopped listening entirely. His eyes had found someone across the room. Seo-yeon was still processing the spectacle, still deciding whether to stay or go, when she realized he was looking back. Not at the room, at her, specifically, precisely, with the stillness of a man who has just found exactly what he came for. She glanced over her shoulder instinctively. Surely there was someone behind her. There was no one, just a wall and a tall arrangement of white peonies. She looked back. He was already moving toward her. The crowd parted the way crowds do, for people who move with real purpose. He walked past the manager mid-sentence, past a cluster of women who had arranged themselves in his path with strategic patience, past Tae-hyun and Soo-min, who looked up with identical expressions of polite confusion, past Ha-yoon, who had positioned herself at the center of the room because the center of the room is where important things happen, and who now watched with an expression cycling rapidly between delight and something quieter and far less comfortable. He was not walking toward the center. He was walking toward the edge, toward Seo-yeon. She stood completely still. Later, she wouldn't be able to explain why, some mix of confusion and social paralysis, the pure cognitive dissonance of a man who looked like that moving toward her with that kind of certainty, in a room full of women, considerably more prepared for this moment than she was. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see his expression wasn't as sealed as it looked from across the room. There was warmth in his eyes that contradicted the composed severity of everything else, a fire visible through a narrow window in an otherwise dark building. He looked at her the way someone looks at a thing they've been searching for and are now quietly confirming is real. Then, softly, meant only for her, though the silence around them was extensive enough that several people heard anyway. There you are. His hand came to rest at her waist, gently, naturally, as if it had rested there before and remembered exactly where it belonged. The ballroom went silent in the specific electric way of a room that has just witnessed the same extraordinary thing and is collectively trying to process it. Seo-yeon's lips parted. What? He looked at her with something that might have been patience, or tenderness, or the particular calm of a man who had spent a long time finding his way to this exact moment, and was in no hurry now that he'd arrived. You stopped replying to me. Somewhere behind him, Seo-yeon heard the unmistakable sound of Ha-yoon's champagne flute being set down with more force than the situation required. If you felt that line in your chest, comment, there you are below. I want to see how many of you caught the goosebumps. The whispers started small, the way fires start, a single point of ignition before spreading with a momentum impossible to stop. Is that her boyfriend? How does she know him? No way, they can't be together. That last one came from somewhere close. Seo-yeon didn't turn to identify the voice. She recognized the frequency of disbelief in it, not a question, but a refusal. A rejection of a reality that didn't match the story certain people had already decided about who deserved what and with whom. But she wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about the hand at her waist, warm and steady through the fabric of her dress. She was thinking about the man in front of her who had just spoken to her in a room full of people with the calm confidence of someone stating a simple, established fact. She was thinking that she had never seen this man before in her life. Had she? I think, she said carefully, keeping her voice low, you might have the wrong person. He looked at her, almost amused, the expression living at the very edge of his composure, barely detectable. Han Seo-yeon, Architect. You studied on a full academic scholarship, graduated top of your program. You run a small firm here in Seoul. You were in Busan 14 months ago for a design conference. A pause. I don't have the wrong person. Seo-yeon stared at him. The detail about Busan moved through her mind slowly, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't realized existed. Busan, 14 months ago. The conference had run through the second week of November, gray and raining, the kind of cold that's damper than sharp. She'd stayed 2 extra days because she'd fallen in love with the harbor the irrational way you sometimes fall for a place, as if the geography itself is telling you something. Don't, she started. You don't remember me, he said. Not an accusation, his tone entirely even, almost gentle, like a man who'd anticipated this and made peace with it long before tonight. That's all right. I remember you. Behind him, the ballroom kept its low electric hum of speculation. Seo-yeon was peripherally aware of Ha-yoon, who hadn't drifted casually closer, but had moved with deliberate purpose, standing close enough to hear and far enough to pretend she wasn't listening. Seo-yeon noticed none of it with the attention it deserved, because all of her focus belonged to the man in front of her, and the strange, slow-turning sensation of memory beginning to move. What's your name? She asked. Kang Do-hyun. The name produced nothing immediately familiar, and yet there was something, not in the name but in the eyes, maybe, in the particular stillness of him, the way he stood like someone who'd learned to be quiet inside himself, not from peace, but from surviving something that required it. Before she could chase the thought further, a voice arrived from her left. I'm so sorry, hi. Ha-yoon materialized with the practiced smoothness of a woman who had been interrupting conversations for 20 years and never once acknowledged doing it. She extended a hand toward Do-hyun. Yoon Ha-yoon, I don't think we've been introduced. I actually have significant interest in the shipping and logistics sector my husband and I have been looking at. Did you eat yet? He wasn't looking at Ha-yoon. He was looking at Seo-yeon. The question was quiet, direct, entirely sincere, the kind that doesn't carry a subtext, that simply wants an answer. Ha-yoon's extended hand hung in the air, then lowered. No, Seo-yeon said. I wasn't really. He gestured lightly toward a quieter seating area at the far end of the ballroom, away from the crowd. Not a command, an invitation delivered by someone confident in the answer but willing to accept a different one. Seo-yeon hesitated 3 seconds, 3 seconds during which she felt the weight of every eye in the room, during which she registered Ha-yoon's expression undergo something remarkable. The precise moment a woman who has spent her whole life being the most important person in every room realizes, with dawning and unwilling clarity, that she is not the most important person in this one. She went. Drop a like right now if you already know Ha-yoon's night is about to get so much worse. You'll want to see what happens to her by the end of this. They sat. A staff member appeared instantly with water, then vanished. Do-hyun turned toward her with the unhurried attention of someone with nowhere else to be. Ask me, he said. Ask you what? Whatever question is in your eyes right now. How do you know my name, where I studied, where I live? How do you know any of it? Because I looked for you, he said simply, without embarrassment, the way people state facts that require no defense. After Busan, for a long time. The words landed strangely in her chest. Why? He was quiet a moment, not evasive. She'd already learned, in these few minutes, the difference in his silences. This one was a man choosing the most accurate words rather than the easiest ones. Because you were kind to me, he said finally. When you had no reason to be, when you didn't know who I was, when it cost you something, your time, your umbrella. The faintest smile moved across his face. Your very expensive coffee, which you gave away and then immediately regretted. Seo-yeon went completely still. The rain, the pharmacy steps, a man sitting there staring at the wet pavement like it owed him an explanation. She'd almost walked past, she almost always walked past, because the city was full of people who needed things she couldn't give. But something about the specific quality of his stillness had stopped her. She'd bought him cold medicine and throat lozenges because he'd been coughing. shared her umbrella in the doorway while they waited out the rain, given him her coffee, an overpriced latte she'd been anticipating for 3 blocks, because he looked like he needed warmth more than she did. They'd talked for 40 minutes about nothing important. About the city, the rain, what it feels like to be far from home. She'd never asked his name, never seen him again. "That was you," she whispered. "That was me." The noise of the ballroom felt very far away. The volume of the whole evening turned down to a low murmur, leaving only this small, quiet space where 2 people sat across from each other with the specific stillness of a moment both understood, without saying so, was significant. "You were sick," she said slowly. "You had a fever, you kept saying it was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," he admitted, "but I wasn't accustomed to accepting help from people. In my experience, help always came with a cost, something attached." He looked at her steadily. "You didn't want anything. You just sat with me in the rain and talked about whether Busan or Seoul had better seafood and gave me your coffee, and when the rain stopped, you just—" He made a small gesture, left, like it was nothing, like kindness was just something you did. Something loosened in Seo-yeon's chest, something wound tight for a long time. "It was nothing," she said softly. "You looked like you needed someone to sit with you." "I did." A pause, quieter now. "I had come from a meeting with my family's board. There had been a betrayal, someone I trusted completely. I walked out of the building and just walked for hours. I ended up on those steps without any clear memory of how I got there. I was not in a good place that night." Seo-yeon thought of the way he'd looked. Not confused, a person who knew exactly where he was and had simply run out of reasons to move. "I'm glad I stopped," she said. "So am I." Something moved across his face. "When I got back to my car, my security team was predictably unhappy with me. I realized I'd never asked your name. I had your coffee cup. It had a name printed on the side. You searched for me because of a coffee cup." "I searched for you," he said, "because I had spent my entire adult life surrounded by people who wanted things from me. My money, my name, my approval. And in 40 minutes in the rain, you treated me like an ordinary person having an ordinary bad day. I had forgotten what that felt like." He looked at her directly. "I wasn't willing to let that go without at least finding you." Seo-yeon was quiet a long moment. Behind her, the ballroom had slowly resumed its noise, conversations restarting, the quartet lifting again, an event redistributing its attention now that the extraordinary thing had apparently settled into something less immediately dramatic. She was aware, distantly, that people were still watching. That Hyun was somewhere in the room, processing an evening that had not gone the way she intended. "Why did you just show up tonight?" she asked. "If your team found me, you had my number." "I did call. 3 times, you didn't answer." Her eyes widened slightly. She thought of the string of unfamiliar numbers she'd declined over the past year. The age of spam calls had made her ruthless with unknown numbers. "I didn't know." "I know," he said, not accusatory. "I decided to come instead." "You came here tonight because I didn't answer your calls." "I had business in the city also." A pause. "Mostly I came because you didn't answer my calls." She laughed. It surprised her, arriving without permission, genuine and unguarded, the first real one of the entire evening. He watched it happen with an expression that was no longer almost a smile. It was a smile, small, controlled, entirely real, and it changed his whole face, softened every severe line of it, turned it briefly into the face of the man on the pharmacy steps who had looked up when she sat beside him, startled that anyone had. Comment below, Team Seo-yeon or Team Do-hyun right now, and subscribe if you want to see how Hyun tries to fix her mistake next, because it's about to get worse for her before it gets better for anyone. She was still smiling when she felt someone approaching the table. Hyun, with Min-jae and Yirin trailing, all 3 wearing the carefully assembled expressions of women projecting casualness while operating with very specific intent. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," Hyun said, directing every molecule of attention at Do-hyun. "I just wanted to properly introduce myself. I mentioned my interests earlier, but I don't think you caught my name, Yoon Hyun. My husband Do-hyun is one of the top cardiologists in Seoul." She laughed lightly, as if this were charm rather than a credential she was deploying. "We'd love to host you for dinner while you're free. We have a beautiful home in." Hyun, His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. It had the quality of a door closing, not slammed, simply shut with quiet, absolute finality. She stopped. "I heard what you said to her earlier tonight," he said. He glanced toward Seo-yeon briefly, then back. His expression was entirely composed, which somehow made it worse than if he'd been angry. "About her needing no one, about being too self-sufficient for a man to want her." He paused. "I heard all of it." Ha-yoon's smile faltered at the edges, the way ice cracks before it fully gives. You were simply cruel," he said, "to a woman who has spent 12 years building something real while people like you built nothing but opinions about her." His tone stayed level, almost gentle, which made it land harder. "I don't need an introduction to your husband's credentials. I need you to understand that the woman you spent this evening diminishing is the reason I flew across the country on a Thursday." The silence that followed was the kind people remember for years. Minjai's mouth opened slightly, then closed again, as if she'd thought better of whatever she was about to add. Yirin, to her credit, looked almost sympathetic, not to Ha-yoon, but to the sheer scale of the misjudgment, the way you feel a second-hand cringe watching someone walk into a glass door they should have seen coming. Around them, the small cluster of onlookers who had drifted close enough to listen without appearing to listen had gone very quiet, the particular quiet of people trying to memorize a sentence so they can repeat it accurately later. Somewhere behind Ha-yoon, Do-yeon had begun making his way over, sensing from across the room that whatever was happening at this table required his presence, and arriving a beat too late to prevent any of it. Ha-yoon recovered, barely, with a thin laugh, the kind that tries to retroactively turn a humiliation into a joke everyone was supposedly in on. "Of course, I only meant." "I know what you meant," Do-hyun said. "I've spent my whole life around people who say one thing and mean another. I recognize the architecture of it immediately." He turned back to Seo-yeon, and something in his face softened again, the door reopening just for her. "Shall we go somewhere quieter?" Seo-yeon looked past him for one last second, at Ha-yoon, frozen mid-recalibration. At Tae-hyun, watching from across the room with an expression she didn't stop to read. At the whole gleaming, glittering room that had spent 12 years teaching her she wasn't enough. She didn't owe any of them her attention anymore. "Yes," she said, "let's go." She stood and Do-hyun rose with her, his hand finding the small of her back again, not performative this time, not for the room, just steady, just there. As they walked toward the elevator, she heard Ha-yoon's voice behind them, pitched too loud, trying to reclaim a room that had already stopped listening to her. Seo-yeon didn't turn around. For the first time all night, she didn't need to. If you made it this far, you already know this story earned your subscribe button. Hit it now so you don't miss part 2, where Ha-yoon tries one more time to fix what she broke, and it goes even worse for her. Drop a comment telling me what you'd have said to her instead. I'm reading every one tonight.